My name is Frank Peterson. I am 61 years old now, but I was 58 when it happened. For 32 years, I was a fish and wildlife officer for the state of Washington. I've spent more of my life in the woods than most people have spent in their own homes. I've tracked cougars, tranquilized bears, dealt with poachers, and rescued lost hikers. I've seen things that would make a city person's skin crawl: animals caught in traps, the aftermath of a wolf pack kill, the eerie silence of a forest after a wildfire. I thought I understood the wilderness. I thought I knew its rules, its rhythms, and its dangers. I was a competent man, grounded in facts and experience. I was wrong. What I'm about to tell you isn't a story I share. My brother Jake knows. He was there. We don't talk about it, not anymore. The words just don't work. The official report, the one filed by the Skamania County Sheriff's Department, says our friend Brian Miller was the victim of a bear attack. It says Jake and I survived, suffering from shock and exposure. It's a neat, tidy explanation that fits into the world everyone understands. It's also a complete and utter lie. The truth is, I don't go into the woods anymore. I sold my rifles. I live in a town now, a small one, but a town nonetheless, with streetlights and neighbors and the sound of cars. The silence of the forest is a sound I can no longer bear. It was our annual elk hunt the first week of October. We always went to the same area, deep in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. It was remote, a place you could only get to with a good four-wheel drive and a willingness to drive for 2 hours on a gravel road that got narrower and rougher with every mile. That was the point. We wanted to be away from everyone, from the weekend warriors and the road hunters. Our spot was a small, level clearing about a quarter-mile off an old, overgrown logging spur. We'd been going there for 15 years. It was as familiar to me as my own backyard. There were 3 of us, me, my younger brother Jake, and his friend from work, Brian. Jake was solid. He'd learned everything he knew about the outdoors from me, and he was a good student. Calm under pressure, a fine shot, respected the woods. Brian was Brian. A city guy mostly. He was a decent enough fellow, quick with a joke. But this was only his second time out with us. He treated the woods like a theme park, a little too loud, a little too careless. He saw it as a backdrop for a good time, not as a living thing that demanded respect. I tried to explain the difference to him once, but it didn't take. We got to the clearing late Thursday afternoon. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. The aspens were a brilliant yellow, and the sky was that piercing, cloudless blue you only get in the mountains in autumn. It felt perfect. We set up camp with the easy efficiency of long practice. 2 dome tents, a large tarp strung between 2 firs for a cooking area, and a fire pit ringed with stones we'd placed there years ago. Everything was normal. The familiar sounds were all there. A Steller's jay squawking in the distance, the rustle of a squirrel in the underbrush, the gentle sigh of the wind through the high branches. We made dinner, drank a little whiskey, and told the same old stories around the fire. Brian was in his element, laughing loudly, his voice echoing in the quiet. I remember telling him to keep it down. That sound carries out here. He just grinned and said he was just letting the bears know we were here so they wouldn't get startled. The irony of that statement is something that visits me in the dark. The first sign that something was wrong came the next morning. It wasn't a sound, it was the lack of one. I woke just before dawn, as I always do. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cold, gray light. And I was hit by the silence. Not just quiet, but a deep, profound, unnatural silence. The birds weren't singing their morning chorus. The squirrels weren't chattering and chasing each other up the trees. There was no rustle of small things in the leaves. There was only the sound of my own breathing and the faint whisper of the wind, and even that seemed muffled, hesitant. I've been in the woods when it gets quiet, before a storm or when a major predator is moving through. But this was different. This felt heavy, oppressive, like the entire forest was holding its breath. I stood there for a long time, scanning the tree line, every sense on high alert. My training kicked in. I looked for tracks, for movement, for anything out of place. I saw nothing. After a few minutes, Jake's tent unzipped and he came out, stretching. He stopped and looked at me. "Quiet this morning," he said, his voice low. He felt it too. Brian emerged a few minutes later, yawning and complaining about the cold.
He didn't notice the silence, or if he did, he didn't care. He started clanging pots and pans together to make coffee, and the jarring noise felt like a violation. We spent the day scouting, splitting up to cover more ground. The strange quiet persisted. It was unnerving. The woods felt empty, sterile. We saw no squirrels, no chipmunks, not even any deer sign, which was unheard of for that area. It was as if every living creature had packed up and left overnight. I tried to rationalize it. A sudden temperature drop, maybe, a change in barometric pressure, but none of my explanations felt right. My internal compass of how the wild should feel was spinning wildly. A knot of unease began to tighten in my gut. It was mid-afternoon when Jake and I found the doe. We'd met up on a ridge overlooking a small meadow. He pointed down, his face grim. "You need to see this," he said. We made our way down the slope. The doe was lying in the tall grass near the edge of the trees, or what was left of her. I've seen hundreds of predator kills in my career. This was not a cougar kill. A cat is neat, precise. It goes for the neck, eats its fill from the organs, and often covers the rest of the carcass. This was not a bear kill. A bear is messy, but there's a logic to it. It rips and tears, but it's for consumption. This was different. The doe had been torn in half, literally ripped apart at the torso. The two halves were 20 feet from each other. The spine was snapped and splintered, the ends jagged like broken driftwood. It would have taken immense, impossible strength. There were no claw marks like you'd see from a bear, and no bite marks on the neck. The ribs were splayed open, broken outwards, as if something had reached inside and pulled. Some of the meat was eaten, but most of it was just scattered, left to rot. It felt less like a feeding and more like an act of savage violence, of rage. "What the hell does that?" Jake whispered, his eyes wide. I didn't have an answer. I knelt, examining the ground around the carcass. The earth was soft, and there were tracks. They were huge, bigger than any bear track I had ever seen. And they were wrong. They were long, more like a man's footprint than a bear's paw, but they had 3 thick, clawed toes and a smaller one off to the side. The stride was enormous, easily 6 or 7 feet between prints. And there was something else. Here and there, I saw a print that was clearly bipedal. It wasn't a bear walking on its hind legs for a few steps. The prints were deep, evenly spaced, and went on for a good 30 yards before disappearing into the thicker brush. "Grizzly?" Jake asked, though we both knew there hadn't been a confirmed grizzly in this part of Washington for decades. "No," I said, shaking my head. "The foot's all wrong, and a grizzly wouldn't do this." I stood up, the knot in my stomach now a cold, hard stone. "Let's go back to camp. We'll get Brian. We're packing up." Jake didn't argue. The wrongness of the scene was undeniable. The silent forest, the brutalized carcass, the impossible tracks. It was a language we didn't speak, but we understood the message perfectly. Get out. When we got back to camp, Brian was sitting by the unlit fire pit cleaning his rifle. We told him what we'd found. He listened, a skeptical smirk on his face. Torn in half? Come on, you guys are pulling my leg. We described the tracks, the sheer violence of it. Probably just a big messed up bear, he said, waving it off. Or a cougar. You guys are getting spooked by nothing. His refusal to take it seriously was infuriating.
It was the arrogance of someone who had never faced a real threat, who believed the world was a safe and predictable place. Brian, listen to me, I said, my voice low and firm. I worked in these woods for 30 years. I have never seen anything like this. Something is very, very wrong here. We are leaving. Now. He finally saw the look on my face, and his smirk faded. He grumbled about us being overly cautious, but agreed to help pack. The sun was getting low, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. The oppressive silence seemed to deepen with the fading light. Every snap of a twig under my boot sounded like a gunshot. My head was on a constant swivel, scanning the dark wall of trees that surrounded our little clearing. I felt watched. It was a primal, prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being prey. We worked quickly, not speaking much. We took down one of the tents and were starting on the second when we heard the first sound that wasn't our own. It was a loud crack, like a thick branch being snapped deliberately. It came from the woods to the north, maybe 100 yards out. We all froze. We stood there, motionless, for a full minute. Nothing. Brian let out a nervous laugh. Probably just a deer, he said, his voice a little too high. Then another crack, this time closer, from the west. Then a third to the south. It was circling us. Whatever it was big, and it was letting us know it was there. That's when the smell hit us. It was a thick, gagging stench that rolled into the clearing on the evening air. It was like a wet dog mixed with rotting meat and something else, something metallic and musky, like old blood. It was a predator's smell, rank and overpowering. Brian gagged, covering his nose with his sleeve. My God, what is that? The fear was finally in his voice. Get your rifle, I told him, my own already in my hands. Jake had his as well, his back to mine as we scanned the perimeter. The sun had dipped below the ridgeline now, and the forest was sinking into a deep, purple twilight. The shadows were no longer just shadows. They were deep pools of blackness where anything could be hiding. We abandoned the idea of packing. We moved together to the fire pit, standing back to back, a triangle of terrified men. The cracking sound stopped. The silence returned, but now it was 1,000 times more menacing. It was a loaded silence, full of intent. We heard it moving. It wasn't the sound of a four-legged animal. It was a heavy, shuffling footfall. A two-legged gait. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, deliberate, circling just beyond the range of our vision in the gathering dark. It was massive. We could hear the brush groaning and scraping against its body as it passed. The smell was getting stronger, almost suffocating. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I was trying to control my breathing, trying to think. My training was screaming at me, identify the threat. But my gut was screaming something else. You don't want to know what it is. Then came a new sound, one that broke through the fear and chilled me to the bone. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate in my chest. It wasn't the growl of a bear or a wolf. It was deeper, more resonant, and it had something else in it. A chilling, calculating intelligence. The sound rose in pitch until it became a series of clicks and chuffs, almost like it was trying to communicate or mock us. What is that? Brian whispered, his voice trembling. I don't know, I said honestly. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, frozen in the center of the clearing as the last of the light bled from the sky. The heavy footsteps continued their slow, patient circle. It was toying with us. It was a cat playing with a mouse before the kill. It knew we were there. It knew we were armed, and it wasn't afraid.
The absolute confidence of the thing was perhaps the most terrifying part of all. We decided to get a fire going, hoping the light and flame would keep it at bay. Jake and I kept watch while Brian, his hands shaking, fumbled with the lighter and kindling. The small flame flickered to life, and as he added more wood, it grew into a proper blaze, pushing back the darkness to the edge of the clearing. The firelight danced on the tree trunks, turning the forest into a wall of shifting, monstrous shapes. The heavy footfalls stopped. The silence pressed in again. For a moment, we allowed ourselves a flicker of hope. Maybe the fire had scared it off. That hope was shattered when a rock the size of a bowling ball arched out of the darkness and landed in the center of our camp with a heavy thud, missing Brian by inches. It hadn't been thrown in a high arc. Its trajectory was flat, fast. It had been hurled with incredible force. We all flinched back. Another one followed, smashing the plastic water container, sending a spray of water hissing into the edge of the fire. It was a clear display of intelligence. It was trying to destroy our supplies, to intimidate us. It was using tools. "It's throwing rocks at us," Brian shrieked, pure panic in his voice now. "Stay calm," I snapped, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Don't fire unless you have a target." Firing blindly into the woods was the worst thing we could do. It would waste ammunition and tell the creature exactly where we were. We huddled closer to the fire, its comforting warmth doing nothing to chase away the icy dread that had settled deep in our bones. We knew we were not going to be sleeping. We were in a siege. Hours passed. The night grew deeper, colder. The creature continued its psychological warfare. It would stay silent for a long time, lulling us into a tense state of waiting, and then it would let out a blood-curdling howl. It wasn't a wolf howl. It was a strangled, agonizing sound, half bellow, half scream, that echoed through the valleys. Then it would start the footsteps again, sometimes slow and deliberate, sometimes crashing through the undergrowth in a sudden, terrifying rush, making us flinch and raise our rifles, only for the sound to stop just at the edge of the firelight. Sometime after midnight, it got bolder. We heard sniffing, loud, wet, curious sniffs coming from just beyond the circle of light. It was methodically moving around our camp, smelling us, smelling our gear. Then came a scraping sound against the side of the remaining tent. The nylon fabric groaned under a heavy pressure, as if something was leaning against it, testing its strength. Brian let out a small, choked sob. He was breaking. I couldn't blame him. I was a breath away from it myself. All my years of experience, all my knowledge of the natural world had been rendered useless. We were facing something that did not belong, something that operated by a set of rules we couldn't possibly comprehend. I made a decision. We couldn't stay there until morning. Our nerves were shot, and Brian was becoming a liability. Our only chance was the truck. It was a quarter-mile away, but it might as well have been on the moon. "Okay," I said, my voice a harsh whisper. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a break for the truck. We stay together. We move slow and quiet until we're clear of the camp. Then we run. Jake, you take point. Brian, you're in the middle. I'll take the rear. Don't stop for anything. You understand?" They both nodded, their faces pale and slick with sweat in the firelight. We gathered what we could: rifles,
a couple of flashlights, the truck keys. We left everything else. We took a deep breath, and as one, we stepped away from the relative safety of the fire and into the oppressive darkness of the trees.
The moment we were out of the direct light, the woods felt alive, electric with menace. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a hulking shape. The air was thick with that foul, predatory stench. We moved slowly, placing each foot with deliberate care. The dry leaves on the ground were like landmines, each crunch a deafening explosion in the silence. We made it about 50 yards from the camp, to the edge of the logging trail. We could just make out the faint, pale line of it disappearing into the blackness. We were about to start running when we heard it. It wasn't behind us in the camp. It was in front of us. A low growl rumbled from the darkness down the trail, the direction we needed to go. It had anticipated us. It had outmaneuvered us. It had herded us away from the fire and cut off our escape. The sheer, terrifying intelligence of it was staggering. We froze, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous, trembling path through the trees. The beam caught movement, and for the first time, I saw it. It was only for a second, a fleeting glimpse as it moved between two massive firs, but it was enough. It was tall, impossibly so, at least 8 feet. The shoulders were immense, a solid wall of muscle, wider than a refrigerator. It was covered in coarse, dark fur, matted and filthy, and it was walking on 2 legs. The legs were bent wrong, like a dog's, with the hocks halfway up the calf. It moved with a fluid, loping gait that was both graceful and deeply unsettling. Then it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. But the image was burned into my mind. This was no bear. This was no man in a suit. This was something else entirely. Panic finally took over. Brian screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror, and he turned and bolted back towards the fire. "Brian, no!" I yelled, but it was too late. He was running blindly, crashing through the brush. It was the worst possible thing he could have done. The creature reacted instantly. There was an explosive roar from the woods in front of us, a sound of fury and triumph, and then a noise like a freight train crashing through the forest as it gave chase. Jake and I stood paralyzed for a second. Then we ran after Brian, back toward the clearing. We burst through the trees just in time to see the horror unfold. Brian had almost reached the fire pit. The creature came out of the tree line from the side, moving with a speed that defied its bulk. It wasn't running. It was covering the ground in huge, bounding leaps. In the flickering firelight, I saw it clearly. The head was long and lupine, like a timber wolf's, with a heavy snout and pointed ears laid flat against its skull. Its eyes glowed with a sickening yellow-green luminescence, reflecting the fire. Its arms were too long for its body, ending in huge, human-like hands tipped with thick, black claws. It intercepted Brian before he was 10 feet from the fire. It didn't slow down. It simply reached out one of its long arms and swatted him out of the air like he was an insect. Brian was a big man, at least 200 pounds, but it tossed him effortlessly. He flew a good 15 feet and slammed into the base of a tree with a sickening crunch. He didn't move again. The creature stood over him for a moment, its massive chest heaving. It turned its canine head and looked directly at us. The firelight glinted off its teeth. They were long, yellow, and sharp. It wasn't just an animal. In those glowing eyes, I saw a cold, hateful intelligence. It knew what we were, and it despised us. Then it did something that I still can't process. It ignored Brian's body. It straightened up to its full, terrifying height, took 2 long strides towards us, and let out a deafening roar that shook the very ground. Jake and I reacted on instinct. We brought our rifles up and fired. I was aiming for center mass, the largest target. My .30-06 boomed, the recoil slamming into my shoulder. I saw the bullet strike its chest, saw the fur fly. It barely flinched. It grunted, a sound of annoyance more than pain, and kept coming. Jake fired his .308, hitting it in the shoulder. It staggered a step, roared again, and charged. The next 30 seconds were a blur of pure chaos and survival. It was on us in 2 bounds. It swiped at Jake, who tried to dodge but was too slow. The claws caught him across the chest, tearing through his jacket and shirt like paper. He screamed and went down, his rifle flying from his hands. The creature loomed over him, its jaws open, saliva dripping from its long teeth. I chambered another round and fired from the hip, the shot going wild. I didn't have time to aim. I used the rifle like a club, swinging the stock at its head. It was like hitting a brick wall. The wooden stock shattered on impact, and the blow only seemed to enrage it further. It spun on me, its yellow eyes burning with hate. It was so close I could smell its foul, carrion breath. It backhanded me, a casual, almost contemptuous motion. The force was incredible. I was lifted off my feet and thrown backwards. I landed hard on my side, the air driven from my lungs. My head hit a rock, and the world exploded into a starburst of white light. I lay there, dazed, gasping for air, my rifle lost in the dark. Through the swimming haze of pain, I saw it turn back to Jake. My brother was trying to crawl away, his face a mask of terror. The creature took a step toward him, lowering its massive head. This was it. We were dead. All my life I had been the protector, the one who knew what to do. And now I was helpless. I was going to watch my brother die. A surge of pure, desperate adrenaline cut through the fog in my head. I fumbled at my belt for my sidearm, a heavy .44 Magnum revolver I always carried in the woods. My fingers were numb and clumsy, but I managed to wrap them around the grip and pull it from the holster. I propped myself up on one elbow. The world was spinning, and my vision was blurry. The creature had its back mostly to me, focused on Jake. I thumbed the hammer back, aimed for the center of that broad, dark back, and squeezed the trigger. The magnum bucked in my hand with a deafening roar. The creature screamed, a high-pitched shriek of agony that was completely different from its earlier roars. It hunched over, twisting around. The heavy slug had hit it in the lower back or hip. It stumbled, its strange, dog-like leg buckling beneath it. It turned its head and stared right at me. The hatred in its eyes was a physical force. It forgot about Jake. It started towards me, dragging its injured leg. It was still fast. It was snarling, a low, continuous rumble of promised death. I fired again. The bullet went wide. It was only 10 feet away. I could see the individual hairs on its snout, the flecks of blood on its teeth. 5 feet. I closed my eyes and fired a third time, just pointing the gun in its direction. Then something happened that I will take to my grave. It stopped. It was standing directly over me, close enough to reach down and tear my head from my shoulders. It was wounded, enraged. I was disarmed, helpless at its feet. I opened my eyes and looked up into its face. It stared down at me, its glowing yellow eyes seeming to look right through me, into my soul. Its chest was heaving, the growl still vibrating in its throat. I could see the wound on its hip, dark blood matting the fur. This was the end. I waited for the claws, for the teeth, but they didn't come. We were locked in that gaze for what felt like an eternity. The intelligent, hateful glare softened, replaced by something I couldn't identify. Was it curiosity? Pity? Contempt? I don't know. It blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. Then it turned its head, looked over at Jake, who was now struggling to get to his feet, then looked back down at me. It let out a soft huff, a puff of hot, foul air that washed over my face. And then it turned and limped away. It didn't run, it just walked, dragging its wounded leg, and disappeared into the blackness of the trees. It spared me. I have no idea why. The silence it left behind was more profound than any that had come before. For a long moment, neither Jake nor I moved. We just listened to the crackling of the fire and the frantic beating of our own hearts. Finally, Jake staggered over to me. "Frank, are you okay?" His voice was a ragged whisper. His chest was bleeding freely from 4 deep gashes. "I think so," I managed, my own voice hoarse. I sat up, my head throbbing, my body a symphony of pain. We looked at the spot where Brian had fallen. His body was still there. The reality of what had just happened crashed down on me. "The truck," I croaked. "We have to get to the truck." We didn't look back at Brian. We couldn't. We helped each other up and began the longest, most terrifying quarter-mile journey of my life. Every shadow was the creature. Every sound was its return. We stumbled down the logging trail, Jake leaning on me, both of us bleeding and in shock. When the moonlight finally glinted off the windshield of my pickup, I almost collapsed with relief. I fumbled the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries. The engine turned over with a roar that was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I slammed it into gear, and we tore down that gravel road, not daring to look in the rearview mirror, terrified of what we might see following us. We didn't stop until we hit paved roads and saw the lights of a small town. We drove straight to the Skamania County Sheriff's Office. A sleepy-eyed deputy looked up from his desk as we stumbled in, covered in blood, dirt, and terror.
I did my best to give a report. I'm a trained observer. I've given hundreds of official statements in my career. But how do you report that? I fell back on my training and I edited the truth. I told him we were attacked by a bear, a large, unusually aggressive black bear. I said it came into our camp, that we shot at it, and that it took our friend. I said we ran for our lives. The deputy took our statement, his expression a mixture of pity and disbelief. He called for medics to check us out. Jake had 4 broken ribs, and the gashes on his chest required dozens of stitches. I had a severe concussion and cracked ribs. We spent the night in a small local hospital. The next morning, a sheriff's detective came to interview us. He was a young guy with a clipboard and a skeptical attitude. I told him the same story. A bear. He asked why we didn't report it as a grizzly. I told him I didn't get a good look at it. He made notes, asked a few more questions, and left. I could tell he didn't believe us, not really. He probably thought we'd gotten drunk, maybe had a fight, and that Brian had wandered off and gotten lost. A search party went up 2 days later. They found the campsite. It was destroyed, just as we'd left it. They found our gear, the shattered rifle stock, the empty shell casings. They found Brian's body. The official report said the scene was consistent with a bear attack. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as animal predation. Case closed. They called it a tragedy, an unfortunate encounter with wildlife. Jake and I were just the lucky survivors. They never found the slugs from my Magnum.
They found the casings from our rifles, but they dismissed them as us firing wildly in a panic. No one questioned why a black bear would display such tactical intelligence, throwing rocks, circling the camp, herding us. No one could explain the tracks I saw, because a day of rain had washed them all away by the time the search party got there. Our story, even the sanitized version, was put down to trauma and shock, distorting our memories. It was easier for them to believe in a freak bear attack than to confront the alternative. I tried to push it once. I went to the sheriff myself a week later. I told him I was a retired F&W officer, that I knew what a bear attack looked like, and this wasn't it. I started to describe the bipedal tracks, the impossible strength. He held up a hand and stopped me. "Frank," he said, his voice tired, "you've been through a horrible ordeal. Your mind plays tricks on you in situations like that. Let it go, for your own good." He was shutting me down, professionally and politely. I was being told to drop it. I was a crazy old man, traumatized and unreliable. I left his office that day feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The only person who gave me any validation was a man named Earl, a retired Forest Service ranger I'd known for years. He called me about a month after the incident. He'd heard what happened. After I told him the whole story, the real one, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I expected him to tell me I was crazy too. Instead, he just sighed. "I'm sorry, Frank," he said, his voice heavy. "You boys stirred up something you shouldn't have." He told me that over his 40 years with the Forest Service, he'd heard a handful of other stories like mine. From loggers, from hunters, from hikers who got way off the trail. Stories of a huge, hairy, two-legged thing with a dog's head. Stories that were never officially filed, just whispered about and then buried. "They call that whole area the dark stretch," he said. "Bad things happen in there. People disappear. You were lucky. Whatever you do, don't ever go back." He was right. I was lucky. But I don't feel lucky. I feel cursed. Cursed with the knowledge that the world isn't the safe, understandable place I thought it was. The neat categories of science and biology that I built my life around have been shattered. There are things in the deep, dark woods that are not in any field guide. Things that are ancient, intelligent, and full of hate for us. Jake moved to Arizona a year later. He couldn't handle the mountains anymore. He works in an office now. We talk on the phone sometimes, but it's strained. We talk about the weather, about sports, about anything but the one thing that truly connects us. The memory is a wall between us. How can you talk about something that your mind refuses to accept? How can you find the words for a nightmare that was real? We are the only two people on Earth who know the truth of what happened to Brian Miller. And the knowledge has isolated us from everyone, including each other. I live with the ghosts of that night every day. I see Brian's face in my dreams, the look of disbelief turning to terror. I hear that final, awful scream. I feel the weight of my own failure. I was the experienced one, the leader. I took them into a place I thought I knew, and I led one of them to his death. The guilt is a physical weight that I carry with me always. Why did I survive? Why did it spare me? That's the question that haunts my waking hours. I go back to that moment, lying on the ground, the creature standing over me, the look in its eyes. It wasn't the look of a dumb animal. It was a conscious being making a choice. It had me. It could have finished me with a single swipe, but it didn't. Did it see something in me? A lack of fear? A flicker of understanding? Or was it something more contemptuous? Was I so pathetic, so insignificant that I wasn't even worth the effort to kill? Was sparing me a greater cruelty than killing me, leaving me alive to carry this memory, this truth that no one else will ever believe? I spend a lot of my time now on the internet, in the dark corners of forums and websites where people share stories like mine. They are dismissed as fiction, as hoaxes, as the ravings of lunatics. But I know they are real. I read the accounts of truckers seeing something cross the road in their headlights, of campers hearing those same guttural howls, of hunters finding those same impossible tracks. We are a scattered community of survivors, each of us isolated by a trauma that society refuses to acknowledge. We are the ones who have looked behind the curtain and seen the terrifying truth of what shares this world with us. So that is my story, the truth of what happened in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. I don't tell it for sympathy or for attention. I tell it as a warning. The world is older and stranger than you can imagine. The maps are not complete. There are still blank spaces, and in those blank spaces, monsters are real. They are not creatures of myth or folklore. They are flesh and blood. They are intelligent. They are powerful. And they are hostile. So, the next time you decide to go deep into the wilderness, far from any road or trail, remember my story. Listen to that little voice in the back of your head, that primal instinct that tells you when something is wrong. Listen to the silence when it is too deep. And if you get the feeling that you are being watched, it's because you probably are. Turn around. Go back to your car. Go home. Lock your doors. Because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some truths, once learned, will break you. I know. I am broken. And I was one of the lucky ones.